Some fears, you can just ignore, and some nightmares, well, those you can forget, but some never leave. Welcome to The Walking Dread.
Yeah, each week we kind of dive into those stories. You know, those addictive horror stories? Those terrifying tales, ancient curses, the kind that just like shake you to your core.
But we do it all in a fun way,
Mm.
spooky, kind of scary way, with that masterful storytelling that keeps you on the edge of your seat. I'm Adrian,
And I'm Julia.
and I'm your guide through all this darkness. And Julia here, she's our expert,
Yeah.
in all things, like fear and folklore.
Always a pleasure to see what shadows we're going to be, stepping into each week.
Before we descend into tonight's, chilling story, make sure you hit that follow button and rate The Walking Dread. It helps us keep the nightmares coming. So tonight we're looking at a story called The Burden of Justice. It's about these archaeologists. And they stumble upon this statue. It's a statue of the Greek goddess Nemesis. And, well, the consequences of disturbing it are pretty terrifying, to say the least. And this story really digs into some heavy themes, like retribution, right? And the whole idea of, like, the cost of trying to restore balance, especially when things have gone so wrong.
Yeah, and to really grasp like the weight of this story, I think it's important to understand Nemesis a bit more, as a figure. Because in Greek mythology, she wasn't just about like getting even right. It was more than that. She represented this divine retribution, and it was specifically aimed at people who showed hubris. So like excessive pride, arrogance, especially, before the gods. And her role really was to restore balance, to bring things back to an even keel, when things had been disrupted. So when we hear about them disturbing her statue, it's not just about like, inviting bad luck. It's potentially messing with this cosmic order,
Right, exactly. And the story really jumps right in with Dr. Shaw. He's the lead archaeologist, and he's a skeptic, right? Like, really doesn't believe in any kind of curse or anything supernatural. He actually says Nemesis is myth, not a supernatural force to be unleashed. Like, very much a man of science, relying on logic and rational explanations for everything.
And it's like that classic setup in these stories, right? Where you have this clash between like a very rational worldview and then, these events that just completely defy logic. And it really amps up that sense of unease, as those rational explanations start to crumble. And it makes you wonder, right? Like, what else might we be missing? In our understanding of the world.
Oh, totally. And almost as soon as they find this statue, these weird accidents start happening at the dig site. But it's not like, random bad luck. It's so targeted, it's unsettling. Like, equipment malfunctions, but only in ways that endanger the people who've been like, cutting corners on safety. And even more disturbing, it seems, to focus on the individuals who are like secretly pocketing artifacts.
Yeah.
Like for their own personal gain.
And what's interesting from like a folklore perspective is how these seemingly isolated incidents, right? They start forming this pattern, and you see this a lot in folklore. This idea that certain places or objects, they can hold on to this kind of negative energy, especially if they've been connected to powerful events or figures, or if they're treated with disrespect. So while Dr. Shaw might dismiss each event on its own, this growing pattern of misfortune, it would be pretty unsettling for the rest of his team, right? Like hinting at something more than just coincidence.
Yeah, and that unease, I mean, it would go through the roof when the really pivotal event happens. The statue, it appears to move.
Yeah.
Like 1 minute it's just there on its pedestal, right? And then suddenly it's facing Dr. Shaw directly.
Okay.
And it's pointing right at him, like accusingly. And what makes it really chilling is that there are these whispers of balance that seem to fill the dig site at that same moment. And the story, it makes it clear it wasn't the wind.
Yeah.
Really pushing us into this supernatural territory.
Yeah, that's the point where any kind of rational explanation, it crumbles. I mean, can you imagine like the impact, the psychological impact of that on these scientists? I mean, these are people who are trained to observe, to analyze, to explain things, with logic and evidence, and then to see something that just so clearly defies all of that. It would be deeply disturbing, right? It would force them to rethink everything they thought they knew about reality. Like, what kind of fear do you think that evokes? Is it just fear of the unknown or something deeper?
I think it's a primal fear, like the fear that the world it doesn't follow the rules that we thought it did,
And from that moment on, Dr. Shaw, he's in this battle, like this terrifying internal battle. He's scared, obviously, but his scientific mind, it's still trying to find some logical explanation, some crack in this whole situation. And he starts thinking maybe they can appease this presence somehow. And he starts thinking, maybe Nemesis isn't just about like mindless revenge, but about this cosmic rebalancing. Like a force that steps in when human justice has failed, and that leads him to this terrifying thought that maybe an offering is needed to set things right.
It's really interesting, right? How these ancient frameworks, like these mythological frameworks, they have this enduring power, even in a modern context, a scientific context. When we're faced with the inexplicable, it seems like our minds they reach back to these old narratives to try and make sense of the chaos. And the idea of an offering, right? Like a way to appease an angry deity or a force of nature. It's a deeply ingrained motif in so many cultures, and it suggests this transactional relationship with the unknown, like a way to restore harmony by acknowledging a transgression, atoning for it. So what kind of injustice do you think Dr. Shaw believes needs to be addressed?
Yeah. Well, at first he might be thinking about the smaller stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
The carelessness of his team, the little thefts. But then the story it gets darker because Dr. Shaw he's got his own secrets. We learn that he inflated his grant proposal significantly, and a valuable artifact that he claimed was lost. Well, it's actually in his own private collection. So it's not just about the wrongdoings of his team. He's carrying the weight of his own ethical compromises.
I mean, the pressure on him at this point must have been immense. He's dealing with what seems like supernatural retribution, but also this very real possibility of being exposed, right? Like his career, his ethics, everything out in the open. It's this perfect storm of guilt and terror, pushing him towards what he believes is the only way to restore balance. So do you think he sees himself as sacrifice, or as someone who's finally facing the consequences of his own hubris in a way he never imagined?
Yeah. And the consequences are brutal and swift. The story describes how quickly his world just falls apart. His colleagues, probably driven by fear, for their own safety, and that human need to blame someone, they turn on him. The media, well, they do what they do, right? They swoop in looking for a sensational story.
Yeah.
His reputation, his life's work, everything he's built, it's just destroyed. Gone.
Yeah, it's like society. We have this deep need to find a scapegoat when things go wrong, especially when it's something we can explain. It's like if we can just pinpoint one person to blame, it gives us a sense of closure, even if it doesn't really address the root of the problem. It's like we're trying to restore order, but it's a false order based on blame, not understanding.
But in the middle of all this total ruin, the story describes Dr. Shaw feeling this impossible peace. He's in his prison cell, right?
Sure.
And there's this thunder echoing outside, which he sees as the statue, like its presence, its accusation. And the strange accidents at the dig site, they stop. The statue goes back to normal. It's like some cosmic debt has been paid.
That moment of peace, it's fascinating. It suggests that on some level the imbalance has been addressed. I mean, Dr. Shaw's downfall is tragic, but the fact that these other unsettling events they stop, it implies that whatever was at work, it's satisfied. Like maybe the public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, even if it's just Dr. Shaw facing consequences, maybe that was enough to restore some kind of equilibrium. So it makes you think, right, about the nature of justice itself. Is it always about punishment? Or can it also be about restoring order?
But the story makes it clear. Dr. Shaw's downfall, it wasn't some noble sacrifice. His ambition, his ethical lapses, they played a huge part in this whole thing. And the story says it outright. Nemesis's justice, it was as flawed and human as the world she sought to balance. But it was still, a form of justice. Not perfect, not clean, but it did something.
It's so true, right? Like mythological justice, how we understand it through these stories, it rarely lines up with, our modern ideas of fairness and due process. It often reflects, the more primal aspects of retribution and the messy reality of human behavior. This idea of flawed justice, it's a recurring theme in folklore, reminding us that even these cosmic forces, they can be influenced by the imperfections of the world they're interacting with.
And the story doesn't end with Dr. Shaw in prison. It introduces these snippets, like from this fictional news outlet, 300 News, and they detail how this embezzler was exposed because of like a weird email error, and then this human trafficking ring, it's suddenly uncovered. these events, they're presented as the work of this invisible hand of retribution. And Dr. Shaw is now seen as this tainted heart, this anchor for this warped justice that's still at work.
Yeah, it really expands the story, right? Like suggesting that disturbing the statue, it might have had this ripple effect, this huge cascade of rebalancing forces in the world. And that Dr. Shaw, because of his connection to that initial act, he's somehow become like the focus of it all. It's this unsettling idea that our actions, they can have these unforeseen consequences, these huge consequences, and that we might be connected to these larger patterns of cause and effect without even realizing it.
And Dr. Shaw, locked in his cell, he goes through this transformation. He's not this respected archaeologist anymore. Now he's this obsessed figure poring over news clippings, trying to find patterns in what he sees as Nemesis's, warped justice. He wants to understand it, to figure out its logic, its targets, maybe even find a way to predict it or even influence it.
That's so human, right? Like, even when things are terrifying, when they seem random, we still try to find meaning, to find order. By studying these news stories, Dr. Shaw, he's trying to impose some kind of framework, some kind of understanding on something that's inherently chaotic and unsettling. It's like this desperate attempt to regain control when he's lost everything else.
So we're left with this haunting image, right, of Dr. Shaw completely forgotten by the world. But inside his cell, he's taken on this new role, this terrifying role. He's both a conduit and maybe a strategist for this terrible, unpredictable justice.
Yeah.
His cell, it's both his prison and his strange command center. And his existence, it's all about this desperate, maybe even delusional search for some twisted form of redemption.
It's a truly unsettling thought, right? This idea that we can be connected to these larger unseen forces, and that our actions, even the ones we think are private, they can have these ripple effects, and they might even contribute to some kind of balance, however harsh, however inexplicable that balance might be.
So what do you think about Dr. Shaw's burden? Was it just punishment for his pride, his mistakes? Or was it this terrifying example of unintended consequences? Those consequences, they can just spin out of control. And it makes you think about the invisible forces that might be, at work in our own world, those subtle rebalancings that happen when injustice seems to win.
Think about those stories we hear in the news, those seemingly random events that bring down the powerful or expose those hidden wrongdoings. Could there be a pattern there, something we're not seeing? And what role do we play in it, in the balance of justice, whether we intend to or not?
Well, thank you for joining us on this unsettling journey into the burden of justice. If you like exploring the eerie and the unexplained, be sure to follow The Walking Dread for more of those addictive horror stories and terrifying tales.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet dreams. If you can sleep.